Good evening and welcome to the intersection of politics and capital. I'm Karabole Tlatla. You're watching Political Capital. Well, if every day brings about progress, the last weekend was definitely moving day for Deputy President of the Republic. Cyril Ramaphosa saw that Eskom is cleaned up ahead of his trip to the World Economic Forum, where he would be able to woo investors with a new narrative. But Cyril Ramaphosa takes his cue from what he learned on his visit when he went to Singapore.
I went with a delegation of my other colleagues. We went to Singapore. And Singapore stood out as the better and the greatest example of how you should manage SOEs, because they've been able to set up their Temasek, but they also set up their wealth fund, and Temasek does a fantastic job. And they have strengthened their state-owned enterprises in the most phenomenal way, where they even invest offshore in a number of other countries. And I took time to ask the Prime Minister. I said, Prime Minister, how did you do this? He said, simple. We made sure that we do not interfere. As a government sets policy, it is the regulator, and the state-owned enterprises run effectively through their boards and also through their executives, competent executives. And that is the success that they've been able to achieve. So less interference, more oversight. They just have an oversight role. And I guess this is what we need to try and fashion and learn from, and make sure that we do have oversight, because these are state-owned enterprises, and there needs to be one parliamentary oversight. There also needs to be government oversight, but it should not be the interference of who you should appoint as the gardener, who you should appoint as the lady or the gentleman who's going to make the tea and all that. And we've tended to want to get involved in all that, and how and what you should procure and so forth.
The man who has to make sure that all these changes yield results is Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba. He himself is accused of appointing some of the people who've led to the downfall we've seen in state-owned enterprises. Here's Malusi Gigaba's view on what needs to be done on Eskom prior to his visit in Davos.
We are going to take certain decisions as speedily as possible. I think you had the Deputy President of the country expressing that we had indeed brought to his attention the very, very urgent challenges that are facing Eskom in particular. There is going to be movement with regard to Eskom, and he was restraining himself to provide the details. And I think he understands the urgency to act with speed. It was good that the message was amplified by other participants at the forum. So there is going to be action. We are going to attend to the challenges facing Eskom. But it's not only Eskom. There's a number of other state-owned companies which require immediate action because they pose a fiscal risk. And we in the National Treasury have been raising those challenges. And there is a commitment to resolve those issues, so that even by the time we come back from Davos, the time we go to the budget, some of those issues have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed in a very concrete way. We are not going to wait until the end of the term of office of the fifth administration. There's going to be action immediately.
Tens of thousands of job losses in an election year. It could make this government very unpopular indeed.
The direction towards which we are looking does not entail that. It entails addressing as of immediate effect the capital structure, because the biggest problem facing Eskom in particular, and a number of other state-owned companies including Sanral, Prasa, Dinel and others, is the capital structure and the future funding model. How do we make them financially sustainable? We will address the governance issues with regard to all these state-owned companies as well as management issues. Obviously, the Davos platform is a very critical platform for South Africa, not only to profile South Africa, but to also showcase our continent as a whole. South Africa remains a gateway into the African continent. We provide a critical platform for many international investors to access the African market. We are working very hard to ensure that we streamline our visa regime in order to to provide headquarters facilities for many international investors that wish to come into the African continent. We will continue to highlight the positives about South Africa with regard to our deep capital markets, the fact that we have got a very advanced and modern financial system. We've got the most modern infrastructure capacity on the continent. We've got a number of other capabilities that will assist international investors to be able to access the African continent. So we will showcase all of those, but together with doing that, we will be showcasing the rest of the African continent, working with our other African partners in regard to that. I will be seeking bilateral engagements during Davos on the sidelines of the various formal platforms, where I will meet with the ministers of finance of Argentina, of Germany, to discuss the Compact with Africa program, which was adopted during Germany's presidency of the G20. But I will also be seeking to engage with the ministers of finance of the various African countries that have joined the Compact, so that we can harmonize our participation there, ensure that there are concrete benefits, identify the lessons to be learned, and see what we need to take forward to the Argentinian presidency of the G20, so that we carry on those engagements. But South Africa will be engaging very actively at various platforms through the business leadership that will be there, the deputy president, other ministers that will be there to showcase South Africa. And there shouldn't be any doubt among international investors that South Africa is both open for business and, as is the case in the Constitution, respects property rights.
Well, joining us now is a man who's on the ground in Davos, Switzerland, who is privy to some of the conversations that are happening. Chris Bishop, CNBC Head of Programming, joins me now. Chris, what is the mood like leading up to the big discussions at Davos? And are you getting a sense that this year will actually yield better results than last year did?
Well, funny you should mention that, because when I was on my way here, a lot of people were saying Africa is not going to be high on the agenda this year. There's low growth across the continent. The interest is waning. But a lot of the people I've been talking to here, millionaires, business types, people who've been around the block on this continent, they've been saying to me the opposite. They're getting a feeling of tremendous optimism, and they're getting a feeling that things might be a bit better for investment on this continent at this stage. But again, you've got to look at it. There's heads of state from 70 countries and ministers, and there's a number of high-profile African leaders. The Vice President of Nigeria is coming, Cyril Ramaphosa, as you mentioned, the head of the ANC, possibly the next president of South Africa. He's here with a strong delegation, 7 ministers apparently, including Malusi Gigaba, the finance minister, and also Jeff Radebe, and some of the old stagers are here. And then you've got the Angolan president, who's come for the first time. Apparently Angola's been represented. Then you've got Emmerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe, who's here with a little investment document under his arm, hoping to convince people to put money into his country. Obviously, Zimbabwe's been struggling terribly in the last few years, but he's offering all kinds of new regulations, trying to make it easier for investors to go in there. So it's actually quite a happening place as far as Africa is concerned at the moment.
Chris Bishop, now you and I both know that Africa will definitely not be able to steal the limelight from a destruction that will be coming towards the end of the Congress, and that is the imminent visit of President Donald Trump. Now, with what he has said about Africa and Africans really taking those comments really hard, Do you think that he might be a distraction when it comes to the agenda that is being set of globalization, working together with a man who puts America first?
Well, I've been asking around, actually. It's been one of the big talking points. Will he come? Will he not come? People saying, yes, he's due here on Thursday. By the way, there's a snow plough going off, 19 to the dozen in the background. You probably hear that noise. Unfortunately, it's one of the essentials in Davos here. We've had a heavy snowfall. But just going back to Trump, he's supposed to make the closing remarks on Friday. And I've been talking to a lot of people here about the irony of President Trump being here. I mean, we're talking about a shared future in a fractured world. I mean, no one can argue with the former or the latter there. But meanwhile, we've got President Donald Trump going to come right into the middle of all of this and try and push his first America policy to the rest of the world, you know, which to me doesn't sound very shared in my book. A lot of people here, a lot of the African delegates I've spoken to, they've been a bit offended by some of his recent comments about the continent, saying it's a terrible place to be in, etc. But I think the very fact that here's a man who once despised this gathering here in Davos as, you know, the sort of elite and had no time for it, etc., etc., no time for globalism. The fact that he's actually coming here to talk to people is not altogether a bad thing. I think that it shows at least that he's taking into cognizance the rest of the world as well as his first America plan.
Chris Bishop, I have to ask you this in 30 seconds now. This show is called Political Capital, and we do not hold back our punches. This is a gathering of elites, of people who have, and they're there to speak about the way the world should work in order for that to trickle down to you and I, my friend. Do you feel that the rich are ready for a better trickle-down narrative this year than they have ever been?
Having studied Davos, albeit from a distance for many years, is that this thing about the poor, I mean, Oxfam yesterday brought out this incredible report where they said 42 of the richest people on the planet own more than 3.7 billion. That's something like 4 times the size of India in terms of wealth. I mean, it's a massive gap, and it's growing every year. I mean, apparently there are a lot more there was a lot bigger gap that's growing now, and a lot of people are talking about it. It's not just the pressure groups on the outside, but a lot of people are talking about it here, saying, well, maybe something should be done. I mean, last night, Elton John, he won this Crystal Award, and he said that the inequality in the world at the moment, it's disgusting. You know, something should be done about it, and I agree entirely, but I think more action needs to be taken by some of the big decision makers and politicians here, as much as anybody else.
While we're talking about action, we saw action coming through from the South African economic front, at least with regards to Eskom, and we saw the deputy president taking some decisive decision. Now, I understand that you got to hang out with Peter Moyo, who is the CEO of Old Mutual Emerging Markets. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, he was here, and it's funny, we were both smiling about it. We were both standing here shivering, and there we were having a conversation about Eskom, South Africa's national power generator, which is in a lot of trouble at the moment. And it was a very good time for me to pop into him to tell him, ask him exactly what his thoughts were on it. He's in a very powerful position, and let's hear what Peter Moyo had to say.
It is actually quite heartening to see the changes that have been made, because it actually talks about a change in the direction on governance. I think it's a very good board, and at least it actually just shows that our government is now committed to making sure that there is proper governance at state-owned entities. We have actually been of the view that it is important that we have very good governance at the state-owned entities. You might actually recall that one of the things that was spoken about when we're thinking about, when we saw the credit down rate coming through, was the concerns around the governances at the state-owned entities. We have actually seen a change at SAA and now at Eskom, so it is actually encouraging, and we actually think that this might actually be the beginning of good news for our country as far as the governance state-owned entities is concerned.
That was Chris Bishop, CNBC's head of programming there, and Peter Moyo from Davos, Switzerland. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Political Capital, the intersection of money and politics. I'm Karabole Tlhahla. We continue our conversations from Davos, Switzerland, where CNBC's head of programming, Chris Bishop, joins us now to discuss the unfolding South African story. Now, Chris, there has been a positive image, as the Deputy President of the Republic has said leading up to WEF, that he takes a positive narrative to WEF, something he can sell to international investors. And we know that South Africa has been gripped by allegations of state capture, especially with regards to state-owned enterprises. And one of the most vocal people with regards to that has been the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Bonang Mohale, who I understand is in Davos.
Yeah, well, we caught up with him, and I think that the feeling I'm getting from a lot of the African delegates here when I've talked about Cyril Ramaphosa, I mean, especially on a day when the rand's flirting with 12 to the dollar, they've been saying, Cyril Ramaphosa, yeah, we like what he's doing. Yes, we like the direction he's going. But it was great to catch up with Bonang Mohale of Business Leadership South Africa, who spoke to my colleague, Bronwyn Nielsen.
We have never felt so emboldened, especially after the last 8 years where the wheels had come off the track and state capture and corruption had increased, where I think clever blacks' notions were peddled. And as a people with great natural endowments, we had just lost our direction and indeed our international competitiveness. And this is borne out by the stats. Now we have, just in 2 weeks, a new president of the African National Congress and indeed the deputy president of the country. And we saw how it was difficult for 6 years to institute a Independent Judicial Commission of Inquiry. And he meets with the president on Sunday, on Monday. It happens. Something that the NDPP had been sitting on for 2 years as credible evidence, nothing was done in 3 days, and this is absolutely being done. So we are here more than anything else, our sole purpose being to promote foreign direct investment into South Africa, to say.
Bonang, how are investors here in Davos receiving Team South Africa? And do they believe we are now open for business?
I must tell you that they are receiving us with great difficulty. One, because, we had lost our shine. But we've got an incredible team here led by the DP himself, the Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba, Trade and Industry, Rob Davis, and I saw EDD, Ibrahim Patel, but also the Minister and the Presidency. It says South Africans have sent their best foot forward, their best team, to really ensure that they are taken seriously.
The key challenge for South Africa in 2018, your view?
I think what we need to do first and foremost is, if we can stem the tide of the almost 100 billion rands that have walked out of our shores through state capture, we can educate a lot of young children, build lots of hospitals and indeed RDP houses. The second is, how do we start believing in ourselves so that we can say we are indeed open for business. The third is, how do we address issues of gender inequality? Because when women have access to connectivity, they've got access to electricity, they've got access to banking, you improve the quality of lives of nations. You address issues of abuse, of femicide, but also you invest in human capital, and you have the most, I think, multiplier effect in terms of return on investment.
And Bonang, as CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, what personally keeps you awake at night?
I think what keeps me awake at night is this notion of global inequality that is growing. I think the world is waking up to the fact that until and unless relative inequality is addressed seriously, then rentier capitalism does not have a future. In fact, neoliberalism is about to collapse because there are a number of things that we took for granted. This notion that there is indeed a normalizing effect of economic globalization that is being challenged.
What are you most looking forward to here at Davos at the 48th Annual World Economic Forum?
We are looking forward to boycotting the President of the United States of America because he has proven that instead of leading and managing the biggest economy in the world, he is actually anti-Muslims, anti-women, anti-black people, anti-poverty, and such notions cannot be allowed to continue. How do you speak disparagingly of people that come from Africa, Haiti, and other developing countries when the US of A itself is a nation of immigrants?
Of course, there was Bonang Mohale, never mincing his words, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. Chris Bishop, now you got a chance to speak to probably the #1 unionist at the World Economic Forum. He is a usual feature, if you will. Mr. Philip Jennings, what did he have to say?
Well, Philip Jennings, I called him a man with a claim to being the biggest union boss in the world. He says he's got 20 million members, including 1 million in Africa alone. This guy's very vocal. He spoke about everything, on how the creeping war against the unions across the world was dividing the people and depriving them of their human rights, and how people have to organize and fight back. But he also spoke very, very vocally on one Donald Trump. Let's hear what he had to say.
The theme of Davos this year is a fractured world. And when we look at our world, we see fractures in many different directions. We see fractures in employment, fractures in income, and above all, fractures in the basic human rights of workers to organize and to negotiate and to collectively bargain. We are seeing a closing of democratic spaces. If we, with our friends in the civil society, have looked at what does closing democratic spaces mean to you? And in their case, they had 106 different countries in the world where these spaces are being closed. When we do our human rights index, we see labor laws becoming more restrictive. We see labor laws being used to restrict collective bargaining. We see a rise in the violence against union members and union leaders. So this fractured world requires those human rights to be respected. So yes, are we on the back foot? No. Are we on the front foot to bring this to the attention of the Davos participants? Very much yes. But I can't do my job unless those human rights are respected. Now, the business leaders themselves should understand, do they work better in societies which are democratic, or where there are forces which prevail, which prevent freedom of expression and freedom of association? Democracies work better for business.
A lot of people in here would say strong unions, militant unions are bad for foreign investors.
It's a myth put about by the foreign investors. The Wall Street plotters influence thinking that, and they produce their tables where they say, oh, strong labour movement, bad economy. It's wrong. You talk to business leaders here where they work with unions, they say business needs that union voice. You know, we were with the Pope just a couple of weeks ago with his people, and he turned around and said, business doesn't understand their social role. They don't understand trade unions anymore. And he said, there will be no good society without a good union. We can prove that where we have good working relationships, where we have the ability to negotiate with business, that business does well. And do we sometimes have to take a stand? We're not ready to capitulate. When Walmart comes to town and says, we're not going to deal with the union, we're not going to take it lying down, but we're saying this is a fractured world, and you cannot create a shared future, which is a theme of this Davos, without working with the trade union movement, recognizing that trade union movement, and having a better distribution of income, because these guys, it's winners take all.
Finally putting in some hard work. That's Chris Bishop there, our man on the ground in Davos, Switzerland. Thank you very much for all the efforts. We expect more. Well, that's where we're going to leave it for this week's Political Capital. Thank you very much for being with us. But as we leave you, we'd like to leave you with a little remembrance of a South African icon of jazz who passed away today. To the family of the Masikelas from CNBC Africa, many condolences on the passing of the great legend.